Stigmas. Did that word just trigger something for you? That's coming up next.
The Whitney Reynolds Show was made possible by Theraderm. We believe that every person should have the opportunity to look as refreshed, young, and healthy as absolutely possible. Children's Learning Place, excellence in early childhood education since 1998. Sharp Vision Modern LASIK, believing is seeing. Sciton, because results matter. Fresh Dental, keeping smiles fresh. And Kevin Kelly with Jameson Sotheby's International Realty. Luxury is an experience, not a price point. And by other sponsors. Hollis Plyman and Company, CPA firm. The Cryo Bar. Cellular Intelligence. Tutu School of Chicagoland. Deluxe Cleaning Services. Chicago Andrea Creative. Goldfish Swim Schools of Chicagoland. Barkbusters Home Dog Training. Instagram My Selfie. And Export Fitness.
The topic, stopping the stigma. But first we must identify where it stems from and how to grow our mindset to flourish without judgment. You're watching The Whitney Reynolds Show. Dr. Holly is a familiar face to TV. From being a weight loss doctor on a national show to personally having to break the stigma with how she saw herself. Let's welcome her out with more. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited.
Well, we are glad to have you here because you are an expert when it comes to self-talk and stigmas. You actually help people lose weight through the way they talk to themselves.
Yes. So Stay to Slim is my book, and it's all really about starting with the mindset. I think so many people, when they want to lose weight, they start with the diet, right? They start with the physical activity, and that's important. It's not just all about what you say, but starting with your mindset, really starting with, do you believe you can succeed?
Yes.
Is just as important as what you're going to put in your mouth.
That is fascinating. So as we were doing research on the show, we were looking at the different types of stigma, and really so much of it is like our own mind. And so how do you get your clients to go through like a breakthrough? Like, how do you get them to change what they're saying to themselves?
Well, first, the first step is really always awareness. Sometimes they don't even realize it. What do you say to yourself? They come into my office sometimes, and the first thing they tell me is all the things they can't do. Or I'm not an athlete. I can't work out. I'll never be this, or I'll never be that, or all the things they can't do. They can't even say anything about what they can do. And so one of the first things we talk about is, let's stop talking about all the things we can't do or things that we're not, and let's start talking about what we can do. And that's sometimes the first place to start.
Well, and it's amazing because I think weight loss is kind of one of those really hard things to do. But if you take your concept to like other areas of our life about like, getting that job we want, and the mindset does have a lot to do with it. Yeah. Now, you personally helped develop this through your own life. Yes. So you lost weight. Tell us about your childhood experience.
Well, I've always struggled with my weight, still struggling with my weight. I always say I can gain weight faster than anybody out there. But struggled my whole life, was on the drill team in Texas. In Texas, that's what you do. You're on the drill team, had to weigh in. That would not be allowed.
Goodness, I can't believe.
I had to weigh in every week. And when I was doing that, I realized what I had to go through to keep my weight at a level was so different than everybody else.
Right.
And so it really got me thinking about, why do I struggle so much?
Yes.
And then that kind of led me to going to medical school. I was always going to be a doctor and saying, I'm going to study this. I'm going to figure this out. I struggled so much. I felt like I had to do so much more than other people that don't struggle with their weight.
Right.
Like, why am I different? And went in to study body weight regulation and nutrition and physical activity. Didn't know I could do that as a doctor, but ultimately figured out I could. Kind of combine those two things, and really then my whole career has been about helping people not just lose weight, but keep it off. That's the hard part.
That is the hard part. And the mental mindset continues with that.
That's the key. I always say half my career when I was younger, I said, okay, I'm just going to develop the best what to do. I studied people who are successful in the National Weight Control Registry, who have lost weight and kept it off. And I'm just going to figure out what they do. Exactly what do they eat? How much physical activity? Do they eat breakfast? How much TV do they watch? I'm going to go into their homes. I went into their homes and said, what does it look like in there? And I'm going to come up with the best what you should do. And I'm going to put it out there, and it's going to help lots of people. And I did that, but it didn't really work like I had hoped, you know? And because it was missing the mindset.
That is so fascinating. So what was like the missing component that you were like, it has to do with this?
So I realized that you can know what to do. You've got to combine the what to do with the right mindset. And that's when you really have transformation. That's when you have true change that lasts.
Wow. And so you've taken this concept, you wrote a book, you starred as the doctor in a show. I mean, that's incredible. And this is all based on like the mindset and how you talk to yourself. So if you had to give to our viewers kind of like the starting line right now, and they're watching this, and maybe not just with weight loss, but just stopping the stigma of whatever's going on in their life. And this is kind of one of those things of like looking inward today and seeing what your stigma is. What would you tell them?
You know, I think it starts with believing in yourself, really. I think it's about believing that you can succeed and figuring out what's super important to you. I always talk about that motivational piece and figuring out why you're going to change. I think a lot of times we think we need to lose weight so we can be different, right? I want to lose some weight, or maybe I want to work out, you know, whatever. I want to do something because I want to be, feel, live differently. And that's all okay, but that's backwards. You really need to be different in order to lose the weight. So it's flipping it. It's really starting with that instead of starting with the diet, starting with the mindset.
Well, and then one of the things that is interesting with asking yourself the question, like what, but also like, what is holding you back? Like, what are those little voices that are telling you potentially you can't? And then taking it the layer back, is it something that was formed in my childhood? Did you discover that in your research, that a lot of people went through experiences that stopped them?
We all have experiences. So, I mean, there's probably no one out there that doesn't have experiences from their childhood. And so we spend a little bit of time in that, but basically it's about moving forward. You know, I'm not about we can figure that all out, and some people need to do that, and that's great, but it's about moving forward from this point on and believing in yourself and starting to tell yourself that you can do this. It's amazing. The body follows the mind. So whatever you tell yourself is super important in the outcome that's going to happen.
And going back to you saying you still struggle with your weight, what do you mentally say to yourself?
Well, you know, I've worked a lot on my mindset. So I'm quick when I catch myself falling off, and I do start telling myself negative things or not believing I can succeed, or fear, like scarcity and fear are like the two things that if you live your life from there, then you're struggling.
Well, and I think all of our viewers can relate to those two words, because I know all of us, you know.
So when I catch myself, because we all do, that's like normal, that kind of, I catch myself quickly now, and I can get myself back on the path.
That's so
and
good.
just kind of release that. It's a lot of times it's about releasing the outcome. I always say sometimes we're so focused on the outcome, sometimes we have to release that and say, okay, I'm doing everything I can. I've got the right mindset. Now I'm going to let it happen.
That is so good. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
As we just heard, stigmas can start with our own mindset. So before we go any further, we wanted to hear from the viewers. We want to know, what stigmas are you struggling with?
So my whole life, my dad has suffered paranoid schizophrenia, and it has been a challenge my whole life growing up. Now, as an adult, I take care of him as he's not competent to take care of himself anymore. And I think that if I could give back to society or open somebody's eyes to it, I would say that it's more in the world than any of us admit or would like to be open to. I think with all of us, and maybe a family member or maybe even ourselves in some way. So I think that society just needs to open their eyes and be a little more heartfelt, because that's somebody's dad or grandmother or a brother or sister or child, and they didn't ask for it. So that's how I would want to empower someone else, to let them know that it's not something you can help. It's not something you're in alone. And I think people should be more compassionate.
Get social with us and make your voice heard. Add your video on WhitneyReynolds.com or on social.
Next up, we are talking stigmas when it comes to our culture. And joining us, we have Dimple Patel. Welcome to the show, Dimple.
Thank you for having me.
So today we've been talking about stopping the stigma. And on a serious note, we're talking about cultural stigmas that sometimes can be life or death choices just on what we've been raised with. So tell us about your story.
My experience first started in college when I was 21 years old. I actually had a car accident and I fractured my pelvis in 3 different spots. And so it took about 11 weeks to recover. And at that time, like when I was at school, it was right after midterms in October. And so I had to leave school and recover. And so I came back to school in, let's say, like January. And so after that, I had my first panic attack at school. And I didn't know that I was having a panic attack, but I knew something was wrong. And so I ended up going to the counseling services at DePaul University.
Wow. And whenever you went there, was that like a weird, like growing up, were you taught to talk about your feelings?
No, actually, we never talked about it. So even like saying, like I knew what a panic attack was, but I'd never experienced it in my family. It was like, you're fine, everything's okay. And we just never really talked about anything.
So then from there, you had that experience. And then tell us about what you went through with your mother.
So about like a year after, I was still trying to recover and I was still in therapy and things were great. And then in 2000, I graduated college in 2010. And then in 2011, my mom died by suicide. And then that's when my family started to struggle, but I personally started to struggle as well, not knowing how to tell my friends what happened or just personally know what to do.
Yeah, so peeling that layer back, and I know this is sensitive for people watching because suicide is unfortunately something that we do have to deal with because it is so delicate and it's hard. So, and especially talking about your mom, was there something that you connected the dots that it was your culture that you were taught not to be open?
I think I first started to know, like, kind of piece that together was when I was in therapy during college. And that's when I started to kind of form my own identity separate from the cultural identity that I was told, like, this is where you're going to go. This is what you're going to do. This is your career path. Like, I felt like everything was like laid out for me. And so when I had that one-on-one time with a therapist, I was able to finally like, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm going through, and kind of put I statements to what I was feeling.
Right. How did you then use that to broaden to help other people? Because you're like, okay, if I did this and I felt this way, and then I lost my mother, you know, how do I help others?
Actually, I didn't say anything for about a couple of years. I just didn't know what to say. And when somebody asked me, like, how did your mom pass away? I'm like, I just wouldn't like answer it. I try to avoid the topic.
Right.
And so I think also the community, the South Asian community also would either make comments or talk about my family negatively. Of like one person had said that we wanted this to happen for the insurance money. And that broke my heart to kind of hear somebody say those things and not be in my shoes or not be in my family's shoes and understand what we were going through. And so in 2014, I was like, you know what? Enough is enough. I want to kind of put my voice to the story and let people know what I was experiencing, what I wanted to say. And I use I because it's my experience. I don't want to speak for my dad or my brother, but what I went through. And I felt very lonely, even though my friends were there and were very supportive. No one knew like what to really say or how to provide, or I couldn't connect and tell them what I was really feeling. And so I shared on Facebook for the first time of like, this is what happened. This is what I went through. And I still can remember it till today. Like, I was so anxious. I was nervous about what are people going to say? How am I going to come off? I didn't know what to expect. And the response I got was so positive. And sorry, no, it was so positive, and I think that's helped me continue because other people can relate to what I went through.
Right. So, do you think stopping the stigma for keeping things in is actually learning how to express yourself or owning your story?
I would say, but also like normalizing that experience too. And that's a big part of it. Within the South Asian culture, we don't often, from my family's perspective, we didn't talk about anything. It was just like mental health wasn't even a conversation. I remember when I was 13, I like asked, what is suicide? And it's something that is either just pushed under the rug. You don't talk about anything outside the family. Even then, it's like you're fine. Things are just kind of moving on.
Right. And then that's normalizing is what you're saying.
Yeah,
It's
like
really-
normalize, have that conversation within the family and understand some of the symptoms if they're coming up. And those things I never knew. A lot of these things I never knew because I grew up in a very traditional Indian household. But even though I was born in India and my mom and I were both born in India, we were raised in two different cultures. I was raised traditionally Indian, but I also had the American culture. And so those were often clashing between as I was growing up. And so when I was in therapy, I was able to finally form my own identity and be able to kind of separate from like the needs of the family more and kind of figure out what I wanted.
Wow, that is beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming on and opening up. I know it's not easy to relive some of that, but really, I'm proud of the person you are now, and essentially what you're saying is who you're evolving into.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Now we have former Cubs manager Joe Maddon, who is passionate about breaking all stigmas when it comes to his players on and off the field. Let's take a look.
There's a lot of stress that happens on and off the field. One of the things I thought was interesting is you were talking about the stigma back in the day when players would see, someone come in to talk about the mental side of everything. Is that gone now?
Yeah, for the most part, I think it's gone. There's still a couple dinosaurs out there that have a hard time with that. But like I said earlier, we encourage that. Now, we actually have meetings and we'll point our sports psychologist department in the path of a player. And like I said, normally right now it's more about the player being accepting of it, not us in the front office up above or the coaching staff. So I pretty much believe the stigma's been released. You look at golfers, you look at football, basketball, every other sport has this. They're incorporating these kind of methods. So I think it's a thing of the past. I think about 10 years ago it started to die a slow death and pretty much accepted right now.
Wow, and you would say that sports does have a mental proponent.
Oh my God, it's all it is. I mean, of course, everybody that plays, if you come and watch the Cubs play, everybody on that field is good physically. They're really good baseball players. What normally sets you apart is how you think and how the group thinks as a whole. And that's the culture, the philosophy you've created. So when you get a bunch of guys out there thinking properly, you pretty much have a better chance of having one more run than the other team on a nightly basis. Of course, there's got to be a talent level, but I'm a huge proponent in really pushing the right thought process.
How to stop the stigmas that could be holding you down. Our next guest, a doctor in the house, is here to talk about how these stigmas could be stopping your breakthrough. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So we've been talking about stopping the stigma, and you know a lot about this because this is what you do on a daily basis with your clients.
Yep.
So we've been talking about stigmas with our mental health, cultural, the way we view ourselves. Overall, what would you call a stigma?
That's a fantastic question. I think a stigma is a reputation and not necessarily the best one. It comes with negative connotations. It can come with a lot of assumption, and it prevents people from their goals, essentially.
And then stigmas, when we do form these, is that some self-talk that forms it, or what makes them kind of come to life to us?
Sure. Well, I think it's a combination of both. I think it can be your own personal perceptions of whatever you have going on, but we are relational creatures. I think we live in a society that glamorizes independence, but in reality, like, we cannot live without the influence of others around us. So I think stigma is highly influenced by the people that we surround ourselves with and society in general.
And taking that another layer, social media, has that impacted some of our stigmas?
For sure. Oh yeah, like just going online and seeing people's opinions, especially like during a political season, like stigma plays a role in many different facets and many different roles. And there can be positive, but there can most likely be negative stigmas tied to multiple things.
And we wanted to identify some stigmas today, but there's obviously so many more that we could have tied in.
Yes.
You know, just when we were even warming up for your segment and getting mic'd and everything, we were talking about therapy.
Yes.
And, you know, it's amazing when you say that word, what that can even, you know, go through your mind. Is it good or bad? And that's a stigma in itself.
Yeah. I mean, with the stigma of therapy, anytime that I feel like there's been progress in the idea of people looking at it in a more positive outcome, I have something that happens in my personal life that like gives me pause. And the most recent time was when I was at a family gathering and my aunt and I were talking, and we were talking about what I do, and she was like, "You must see some crazy people." And I get that a lot. And it wasn't the first time and it wasn't the last time, but I wanted to make sure that this response was a productive one. So I took a deep breath and I just said, actually, I see people just like you and I who are going through significant life transitions and just need a place to talk.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the stigma tied to therapy is a combination of just the fear of what that actually is and this assumption of what therapy actually is and the kind of people that society thinks go to therapy.
So going back to the stigma stuff, when we identify, because a lot of this is going to be inward thinking. So like all you viewers out there, think about what you could be a stigma in your life. Once we identify that, what do we do?
Once we identify the stigma?
Yeah.
I think, again, going back to like influence, it's kind of getting some self-preservation and realizing like, is this what I want to be negative in my life, or is this what I want to be positive in my life? Like if you have the idea or have the want to go to therapy and what's constraining you is this negative stigma tied to it, create some resources. I would look out for other people, get different opinions and different ideas, surround yourself with difference and not the same, to either validate this idea that you have in your mind of this particular stigma or kind of go against it and see what could change and what not.
When you're working with your clients, and you identify that people have some stigmas, do you know that you need to break those up, or is it okay to have those?
I think it's okay to an extent.
Okay.
Like, I feel like you don't need to change your exact perception of a particular stigma, but you don't want it to constrain you. You don't want it to prevent you from possibly doing something that could benefit you in the long run in the best way possible.
Well, and I was going to say, is there any way that we can tweak stigma and make it actually like a positive?
Yeah, like I'm all for a positive reframe. Just it's a different outlook on how to look at something. And I think with therapy, for example, I think if you look at it as a situation where you sit down with someone and just talk about these significant life transitions, as opposed to this very specific idea of who goes to therapy, why they go to therapy, which is most likely like these dramatized versions of what we see on TV and movies, then it kind of makes it a little bit more comfortable.
Right.
Like I work with people of all sorts of presenting problems, like divorce, anxiety, depression, something that we can all relate to and just need a kind of a space to talk about feelings.
Well, you know, I love the thing about a safe space.
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah, I think a safe space is very important. I was actually just processing with someone earlier today around the idea of coming out. I work a lot with the LGBT community, and one of the common frames that is said is, what took you so long? And it's the idea of, you can look at that and think that LGBT person like really kept these feelings in, did not share anything. But I like to reverse it and kind of think of what kind of space was that person providing for them to feel safe to disclose that information.
Right.
So I think it's all about that safe space.
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, of course.
We can't be held mentally hostage for anyone's thoughts but our own. So today, change starts with you. Stop the stigmas in your own mind, and like we learned from our guest, we can also be open about our journeys. When we acknowledge where we are, it can help people find us exactly there. Remember, your story matters. For more information on today's show, visit whitneyreynolds.com.
Go beyond the interview with Whitney Reynolds' 52-Week Guide of Inspiration. The book goes deeper with the topics you see on The Whitney Reynolds Show. To get your copy for $12.95 plus shipping and handling, go to whitneyreynolds.com/store and use code PBS. The Whitney Reynolds Show was made possible by Theraderm. We believe that every person should have the opportunity to look as refreshed, young, and healthy as absolutely possible. Children's Learning Place, excellence in early childhood education since 1998. Sharp Vision Modern LASIK, believing is seeing. Sciton, because results matter. Fresh Dental, keeping smiles fresh. And Kevin Kelly with Jameson Sotheby's International Realty. Luxury is an experience, not a price point. And by other sponsors. Hollis Plyman and Company, CPA firm. The Cryo Bar. Cellular Intelligence. Tutu School of Chicagoland. Deluxe Cleaning Services. Chicago Andrea Creative. Goldfish Swim Schools of Chicagoland. Barkbusters Home Dog Training. Instagram My Selfie. And Export Fitness.